Doctors and nurses, what have been your "why didn't you come in sooner" moments? Doc here. This is far more common than you think. Even in Australia, where healthcare is free, I'd get several instances every week. The general populace is medically illiterate and/or willfully ignorant, especially so when I was working rurally. For example, a woman with a facial basal cell carcinoma, common and easily treatable skin cancer in the early phases, that she refused to acknowledge until it had taken over half of her face and developed a severe systemic infection that ended up ending her. This woman genuinely looked like a zombie. Poor thing. Second, countless folks in their 30s who couldn't feel either of their feet due to permanent nerve damage from uncontrollable type 1 diabetes. It's a tough conversation to have when they ask, "Can't you just fix them so I can go back to work?" Third, last week, a previously very healthy gentleman in his 60s, we're talking several long bike rides every week, who had chest pain, breathlessness, and some near faints for a few days, rocks up to ED after collapsing with a cold right leg, and his heart damage markers are through the roof. Straight to theater to have his coronary arteries stented, 100% blockage of the LAD, aka the Widowmaker, horrendous cardiogenic shock, crap heart, crap oxygen delivery to everything else, and since his heart hadn't been pumping properly, a huge clot, static blood clots like mad, in the left ventricle of his heart that was flicking off mini clots and cutting off the blood supply to half of his organs, including an entire leg. Poor dude had clocked up 200 kilometers on his bike the previous week. Unfortunately, he passed a few days after arriving. The damage to his heart was quite severe, and any recovery made would have resulted in a huge difference in his quality of life. We had him sedated on a ventilator with high-dose infusions supporting his cardiovascular function. His wife and son were adamant that if he recovered, he would not want a life confined to chairs, so we let him go after 2 days of active treatment with no improvement. Usually, families hang on to any thread of hope and prolong the terminal phase, especially in sudden cases like this. I have the utmost respect for the wife and son for being objective and making a terrible decision so quickly. He didn't suffer for long at all. That third instance is just so unfair. The guy did his best, lived a healthy life, worked out all the time, and then just ended up like that. Story 2. I have two. Had a 65-year-old dude who was diagnosed with lymphoma 8 months before we saw him. He lived an hour out of the city and didn't want to drive in for treatment, so he decided he wouldn't get treated at all and stayed on his little remote place in the country by himself. Essentially, because it didn't get treated, it spread along his skin, and his neighbors called an ambulance when popping in on him. It had spread so far that it essentially went from his head to his knees. He couldn't drink and could barely see. He was so severely dehydrated because he was losing so much excess fluid from his open wound that we had to treat him like a severe burns patient and had plastics involvement. The consultant said if he had received treatment, there was a chance he could have recovered. Instead, he passed away 3 weeks later. Also, I was an EMS supervisor for a while and once ran on a patient with classic stroke symptoms, sudden onset one-side paralysis. She was still able to talk, though, and insisted that she neither needed nor wanted to go to the hospital. That was why I, as a supervisor, had been called. The paramedics on the scene, good paramedics by the way, knew they were treading that thin line between necessary transport and the patient's stated desire to not be transported. So I talked with the patient for a little bit and ran into the same problem. So I touched the patient's good leg and asked her if she could feel that. She said yes. Then I touched her bad leg and asked if she could feel that. She said no. I asked her if she could tell me why she couldn't feel it, and she replied that it wasn't her leg. I knew she needed to be transported, and that reply was all I needed. I then told the medics that they could transport her because obviously her mental acuity was impaired to the point that she was unable to make informed judgments on her own care. I made sure they knew that that was the way to write to report too, and once we started to load her up, she provided no resistance at all, which is pretty much what I expected. Never got any word back on how she did though, but also never had that decision come back and bite me. Story 3. I'm a doctor, and while working in A&E, we had an older chap, possibly in his 70s, who several days prior to presentation had a sudden onset severe chest pain and vomiting while loading the car while shopping. He ignored it and struggled home. The next day, he started to lose the use of both legs, and by the time he came to the hospital, had been crawling around his house for several days because he thought it would get better. He had had a major cardiac event, developed a clot which his heart had pumped out, it went down his body, broke in half, and blocked off the blood supply to both legs. He literally had no functioning legs. I don't know what ended up happening to him, but there was no way to save the legs, and I reckon the outcome was very poor, if not fatal. So this is in the UK where healthcare is free at point of access, so debt is not a contributing concern for our patient. Story 4. Obligatory, not a doctor, but I do have a story about myself. I got really sick really fast, but didn't realize it. I had stage 4 Burkitt's leukemia, CNS positive, which is very important to know. Less than 100 people my age will get that cancer each year in the USA, so pretty uncommon. Anyway, I got super sick just over a year ago and just happened to have a doctor's appointment scheduled. Went to the appointment and felt like absolute trash, sweaty, hot, lethargic, lightheaded, terrible heartburn, and just tired. Also, could barely breathe. My dad, who was driving me to the appointment, had to wake me up, and I remember him saying, "Get up, fatty, we have a doctor's appointment to get to, you better be freaking sick." In his defense, he had no idea, and neither did I, just how sick I was, as 2 weeks before I was fine working in South Carolina on a construction job. So we get to the appointment, and I get blood work and an ultrasound of my chest cavity. The doctor saw the ultrasound photos and was stunned, then saw my blood work and told me to get the hell back to the hospital, as we left to go home and would hear the results later. So the doctor saw 7 tumors on my liver, the biggest one the size of a grapefruit and the second largest the size of a baseball, and then saw my blood work was trashed, diagnosed me with cancer and said it was a miracle I was awake, let alone walking and cracking jokes. Only found out later that Burkitt's cell can double in size within 24 to 48 hours. Doc wondered why I hadn't had problems with my monster tumors since before I only scheduled the appointment to fix heartburn. Story 5. When I was in massage school, we did low-cost massages to get our practice hours in. I think like $15 to $25 an hour. So we saw various parts of the community. Once I saw a client who had a smell during the intake, and once I pulled back the sheets to do their feet, I was slapped in the face with it. Pushed forward and did an initial stretch and press on the feet, and out poked some critters from between their toes and on the pads of their feet. It was horrifying, and when I urged them to go to the ER about it, they got offended like I was making fun and then left. And yes, they were diabetic. And yes, I immediately concluded the massage per protocol and also compassion, and grabbed an instructor so we could have that discussion with the client. We brought them into a private room to discuss the health concerns, but the individual was mortified and that emotion was channeled into contempt, accusing us of making fun of their weight. They were severely overweight and said we were making up stuff about their feet because, I can't see them and you just didn't want to touch me. It was so sad because I pleaded with them, offering to drive them to the ER myself, but they just refused and left, never came back. I still think about them, and I hope they overcame that initial reaction and decided to get it checked out, or did it as a whatever they lied way, to discover we weren't making fun and they quickly got treatment that saved their feet and their life. I hope so. Story 6. I work in orthopedics. A very common occurrence is a patient is told to follow up within the week. We like to see fractures between 5 and 7 days. And the patient will call on the 6th day and say, "I broke something and need to be seen tomorrow." This is frustrating because we rarely have the ability to get a patient in next day, and if they called the day of or the day after, then we definitely could have gotten them seen. But my number one "why didn't you come in sooner" moment was getting a call from a patient who had broken their forearm 2 months ago and never followed up. I did get them scheduled, and they no-showed their appointment, rescheduled, they no-showed again, second reschedule, they arrived with a very obvious deformity to their arm due to the fracture healing incorrectly. If they had just come in, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. Blows my mind that they went almost 3 months without care. My dad was also a doctor, and this is somewhat relevant to the rest of this story. So one day at practice, I was going in for a layup and got knocked by a teammate as I went in and ended up going into the wall under the baseline pretty hard with my hand in a really awkward position as it hit, and it hurt. I finished practice barely being able to pressure the ball. I went home, had my dad take a look at it because I felt like it was more than a typical hand sprain. He ran me through the paces quickly and said that it couldn't be broken because I wouldn't be able to handle the test without screaming if it was. Okay, no problem, just a nasty sprain then. So I practiced and played for the next 2 weeks in pain. After one game, I told my mom on the way home that my hand hurt really badly and I needed to get a doctor. Well, one x-ray later, and it turns out that I hit at the angle that caused a break in my hand from it. And I played with a broken hand for 2 freaking weeks because of it. So, cast on the hand, season gone because broken hand, all good, right? Nope. Turns out that the result of playing with it broken also pinched a vein in the neighboring finger. So when I complained that my hand was still hurting 6 months later, we went to the surgeon and I had an avascular necrosis of the knuckle joint, so I had to have one new bone grafted in to keep the finger. Also, no more football at all because the weakened joint could be easily harmed and that would require amputation. So long story short, I injured it at basketball practice. Post-final surgery, I was told I could no longer play football, which was my main sport and potentially could have been a ticket to college for me. I was a starter on every squad at my school, but the hand was too damaged to risk continued play. I was able to keep playing basketball after, but did end up stopping because I could no longer shoot well because of the changes to my hand. Sometimes you need to trust that you're right when your parent doctor tells you your hand isn't broken. If you're enjoying these stories and you're learning some good lessons, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It really helps us out. Thanks for watching, and let's go ahead and move on to the next story. Story 7. Patient here. For 6 months in 2023, I complained to my family doctor that it felt like I swallowed a Super Bowl and it had gotten stuck, and that walking to the mailbox and back caused me so much labored breathing that I needed a 10-minute break to catch my breath. I was also coughing up a bit of red from time to time. He was getting annoyed by my complaining and would just keep prescribing steroids. He told me that because I was fat and a smoker that I needed to accept that I had COPD and that was going to be my life from now on. I finally said, look, send me for whatever type of test will look that far into my throat, and if it comes back as nothing, I'll just stop complaining. And 3 weeks later, I had a sonogram and they asked me to stay for another test, and then they started freaking out and said I had to go from the testing facility to the ER in an ambulance. Their hospital refused to see me, so they sent me to a different one that also refused to see me. We still had no clue as to what was going on. I finally get taken to my current hospital and medical center, and they tell me I need emergency surgery to try and remove the cancer tumor that is growing inside my airway. I only had 4 millimeters, a coffee stirrer to breathe through. Had I not made that deal and had just accepted that not breathing was my new normal, I would have only lived another week or two. My family got a new family doctor, and I was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 cancer, throat, lungs, and spine in July of 2023. I am losing my fight though and started home hospice 2 weeks ago. I put up a good fight, and I'm so thankful that I didn't pass away in 2023. Story 8. Not a doctor or a nurse, but I worked as a doctor's office assistant. A regular patient who was very sweet but unfortunately had an ongoing battle with alcoholism was brought in by his roommate, and I knew instantly that he would pass away soon. I'd seen some jaundiced humans in my time there, but this man was a yellow I never knew was possible. His roommate said, through tears, I've been telling him to come in for weeks, and the patient kept telling roommate to relax, that he was fine. Majorly in denial, I helped him to the exam room, and when the doctor entered the room, he immediately asked them to go call an ambulance. A few weeks earlier wouldn't have helped, but perhaps the end could have been made a bit easier for him. He passed away 7 days later in the hospital. Hit me very hard because I'd known the guy for a few years. Sometimes he would be sober when he called, and sometimes he would be slurring and completely incoherent, but he was always kind. I had another friend I knew from college, and after college he moved out of state, but we would occasionally catch up every few months. Real nice guy, but also a bad alcoholic. He realized it was bad and checked himself into rehab. Last time I spoke to him, he got himself sober and was so appreciative of it. He realized how bad he was and was glad he kicked it. Then he lost his job, started drinking again, got a DUI, then just kept drinking until he eventually passed away. I pulled up his DUI pic and he was so yellow. Just really sad. I had no idea he was going through this, and I really wish I reached out to him sooner to check up on him. Not sure I would have made a difference, but still, I regret not doing it. Something has to change with the culture around drinking. If you find yourself wondering if someone will be saying these things about you someday, I think it's time we all talk to someone, a professional especially, an unbiased friend, or maybe even a family member. Be honest with your doctor, and if anyone ever tells you that they want to quit drinking, let's all be supportive. Story 9. I had a patient come in saying he couldn't see. How long had it been going on? For 5 days. The man had been blind for 5 days and didn't come in because he thought it might be like a cold or something. During the exam, when I asked him to move his legs, he said, "Oh, I can't do that." I asked how long he'd been unable to move his legs or to walk. His wife chimes in, "About 2 years." Never saw a doctor about it. They just borrowed a friend's wheelchair and just kept it rolling. Turned out he'd had multiple strokes with multiple risk factors he just never addressed. Given how little insight he appeared to have into the condition, I honestly felt sorry for him. He didn't have insurance, so I'm sure that played a role in him avoiding seeing anyone. Story 10. Okay, I'm not a doctor. I'm the idiot who didn't come in sooner. When I was a teenager, I thought Converse were the absolute best. Even though the pair I bought were pretty cramped in the toe, I just used them all the time for PE. And here is where things started to go wrong. I started getting an ingrown toenail, and instead of taking care of it, I just tried to cut the nail out and end up with this puffy red angry shooting pain in my toe. Then I noticed some wetness in my shoe. So what do? I just buy a new pack of socks for the next 2 weeks. And by week 2, I wake up and my foot is on fire. I look and it was half red, half purple, and puffy to the touch. I go into urgent care with my mom, who I don't show her the foot, just think that I need it looked at. Doc comes in. Yeah, I'll take a look, but we don't do ingrown toenail extractions. I'm sure it's not that bad. I take off my shoe and the smell, oh my God. My mom turned white and had to sit down as she fell into a literal litany of non-stop prayer. My doctor says, that is the most infected thing I've seen in the last 10 years. I'll grab the kit. We need to get this toenail out and put you on serious antibiotics. Now, do not mess around with ingrown toenails. Story 11. Nurse here. I work in a very rural hospital and we have a patient population that seems to avoid the hospital at all costs. I have had so many, usually related to diabetics with foot sores, almost always resulting in amputation of a toe or more. However, my favorite was an elderly farmer who came in with chest pain that just wouldn't go away, as he put it. When we asked him if he had it before, he had said that he had been having chest pain on and off for years, but it would typically go away after he grabbed his electric fence. Apparently, the first time he had the pain, he was standing out near an electric fence on his farm, and he reached out to steady himself and accidentally grabbed the electric fence, which shocked him and made the pain go away. So after that, whenever he would have the pain, he just went out and grabbed the fence and it made him feel better. He had literally been cardioverting himself for years. He was fixed up and sent on his way, but we all still chuckle about it now and then because he was so nonchalant about it. Story 12. Not a doctor, but was this patient once. My sophomore year of college, I started drinking coffee, and as college students can be wont to do, I drank a lot of it. And one evening during midterms week, I get a bad headache, so I drink some coffee and settle in to churn out a few hours of work. My headache goes away, but I start noticing tingling and numbness in the right side of my body. It eventually gets pretty bad enough that I can feel the line down my face where the tingling ends. My whole right side is totally numb, but I think it's midterms week and I probably just need to sleep it off and it'll be fine, right? So I go to bed, wake up for my 8 a.m. and the numbness is all worse. Eventually, at like 10 a.m., I finally asked a friend to drive me to the ER. The ER doctor was horrified that I had ignored a very obvious sign of a stroke for at least 12 hours. It ended up being a complex migraine brought on by essentially too much caffeine and sleep deprivation. I adjusted parts of my lifestyle, including monitoring my coffee intake, and haven't had a repeat episode since then. My rule for coffee is only drink it when you don't need it. If you need it to stay awake, you should probably take a nap and just be more productive later. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and all the stories that we've had so far and you've learned some life-saving lessons. You made it this far, I'm sure you're also going to enjoy this one. Doctors, what's your dumbest conversation with an adult patient? Story 2 will surely catch your attention and not for the best reasons. I'll see you in that video and thank you for watching this one.